Hi, my name is Rahab. I was born in the city of Jericho in the land of Canaan. The land of Canaan is beset with evil. We have so many gods to worship, over 234 to be precise, and of them the head is Baal. He is a god of war, and he controls nature. His sister god is called Anath, and she demands human sacrifice. In fact, all of our practices in the temples are endeavors to manipulate the gods, to grant us favor in harvest and favor in war. And those practices, they include sodomy, temple prostitution, and sacrifice of our firstborn children. Within the land of Canaan, there are many tribes, many people. Each city has its own wall, each city has its own army and its own leader. But of them all, Jericho is by far the biggest and the strongest. Jericho is the oldest city. It has never been taken in all of the years. There are a couple of reasons why. Firstly, we built on a mount, which gives us a height advantage. And then, on this mount, they've added to it in bricks 2.5 meters high. And on top of those bricks, another 6 meters of wall. So it's almost impenetrable. We also have our own spring, which means we can bunker down if enemies surround us. Jericho actually has 2 walls. I live next to the outer wall, and in fact my one window looks out over the plains. Then there's a second wall, and inside the second wall live the merchants, the royals, the wealthy. So they have 2 walls to protect them. Having said that, we've never been taken, so I'm not sure why the need. I enjoy life in the city outer skirts. Yes, I'm fairly poor. I'm also not married. Through my own choice, I wouldn't want to marry a Canaanite man. My father says I'm his despair for turning down offers of marriage, and my mother says I'm an embarrassment. But I somehow never wanted what the land of Canaan could offer me. Anyhow, it means I have to be self-supporting. And to do that, I run a small inn here in the outer limits of the city. I'm near the inner gate, so it's quite a good place to stay, and I have 2 rooms. So I sell a bed, a meal, something to drink, and for the right coin, just a little bit extra. Oh, I also dry flaxseed on my roof. The flax is long strands that we dry out, and I sell them in the market. The merchants make the most incredible fine fabrics and linen from them. So I get by and I don't owe anyone anything. When I was a small child, I heard tales of a people called the Israelites. They were people from far away, so foreign to us, but something about their story caught my attention. How it goes is hundreds of years ago, they moved to Egypt. And although they had lived there for 400 years, they'd never been assimilated into that Egyptian culture. They'd always kept themselves a bit separate. And as their numbers had increased, the Pharaoh and the people had become afraid of them. So they'd enslaved them. They treated them so badly. And the people had cried out. These Hebrews, these Israelites, had cried out to their God. They called him Yahweh. They said he was the one true God, the God of their ancestors, and they pleaded with him to save them. And they say that their God had raised up a man who was brought up in the Pharaoh's palace. And this man had challenged Pharaoh. His name was Moses. And he challenged him to let the people go and return to their own land. And Pharaoh had refused. So Moses had raised up 10 plagues, each one mocking the God of the Egyptians, until eventually, with the death of his son, Pharaoh had said, "Go, please leave, take your people and go." But then, when he saw them leaving, with all their wealth that they'd accrued, he changed his mind. And he sent the army after them. So here were this people, a people of slaves, stuck between the sea and the army. And their leader Moses had, on God's instruction, walked through and raised his staff, and the sea had parted into 2 huge walls, and the Israelites had crossed through on dry land. And when the Egyptians tried to follow, the sea had crashed in on them, destroying their army, and they had to let them go. And And rumor has it that in the 40 years they've traveled in the desert as a nomadic people, their shoe leather's never worn out. God has provided them with food that they call manna from the sky. He's even given them water out of rocks. He has a cloud that covers them by day from the harsh desert sun, and at night a pillar of fire to light their way. That's the kind of God I want. All our gods do is demand sacrifice, demand depraved acts, demand our firstborn child being consumed by fire. Why would I worship those gods? I want to know more about Yahweh. I want to meet an Israelite. My family think I'm insane because they say the Israelites are a warlike people who have been promised our land and would kill me because I'm fairly immoral. But I don't know. There's something I want to know more. And now, the king of Jericho is in an absolute state. We have heard that the Israelites have camped across the Jordan River from us. And for now we're okay, because the snow is melted on Mount Hebron, so the water's flowing down extremely flooded with the spring floods, and they can't cross. But what happens when those waters go down? How will we protect ourselves? Even with our great wall that we trust so much. So the king is walking in fear. He's put extra guards on the gate, and they're monitoring the traffic in and out of the city. I hadn't taken too much notice. It doesn't really affect me. I'm one of the lowly people in the city. But my inn was full, and I had 2 extra strangers with accents I couldn't quite place. But I was busy earning a living, busy serving goat stew, busy flirting, busy caring for people. So when I served these 2 strangers, I noticed they were quiet. They didn't have much to say, but I left them in peace. My inn can be fairly rowdy. Women tend not to come. And it was well into the evening, and the noise was quite loud when 2 newcomers arrived. They came running in and said, "Did you hear? The king has ordered for a house search. There are spies in the city, Israelite spies." I happened to be clearing the plates away from these 2 strangers, and I saw them pull their headscarves slightly more over their head and shrink back into the shadows. My heart started to pound in my chest. I somehow knew that these were Israelites. One man caught my eye and looked down. Being near, noticed very nice eyes. But I couldn't breathe. Their life would be forfeit if they were found. So as they handed me their coin, I leant forward and whispered in his ears, "Put your arm around me. Let your friends do the same, and follow me up as if we're going to the bedroom." I pocketed the money and stood. And, bless his heart, looking horrified, both men stood, put their arms around me, and we wandered off up the stairs. I glanced back over my shoulders. No one had really taken any notice. It wasn't a terribly unusual thing for me to do. I hurried them up past the bedrooms and right up onto the roof where my flax stalks were drying. And I said to them, "I know you are Israelites. I will look after you. But you have to do as I say, and you have to do it quickly. Everybody knows my inn. Everybody knows strangers come through here. And I'm near the inner gate, so they will come and search here first. Quickly." And I parted the flax, and I made a well in the middle. The musty smell of damp vegetation rose up. As they lay down, I pushed the stalks back over them and patted it flat so you couldn't see they'd been there. And then I ran past the lamp, blew it out, and I walked down the stairs, slammed the front door, shouting a raudy goodbye, and then ran back inside, hiding my flushed face from the crowd. I carried on with business. Flirting, serving, laughing. Eventually my nerves couldn't anymore, and I said, "Right, come on, off you go back to your grumpy wives. I've had enough of you all. Come on, off you go, it's time." And so they left. Some to sleep in the rooms upstairs, but the majority to go home. They were still laughing and talking about what they would do if they caught the spies. So I swept up the room, put away the last plates, was just trimming my lamps, and I heard a loud banging on the outside door. I went to answer, and there were 5 palace guards, spears in hand. Hello, boys. Kitchen's closed. Unless there was something else I can do for you. Very funny, Rahab. We hear you have strangers staying here. Hand them over. We believe they're Israelites. So, those 2 men with the funny accents, big beards? No, they're long gone. They left. They didn't want to spend the night. They were heading out to the main gate. 3 of the soldiers peeled off and went running towards the main gate. The other 2 stood and looked. The captain said, "No offence, Rahab, but we don't really trust the word of a prostitute. Do you mind if we check?" "Go ahead. Just wipe your feet. I've already swept these floors." My knees were shaking as they ran up the stairs. I heard them run up the stairs and rouse my guests, checking that they were Canaanites. And then my knees buckled and I sank onto a chair as they ran further up onto the roof. I fiddled with the lamp. If they found those men, my life and my family's would be forfeit for what I had done. But fairly quickly they came running back down, their feet thumping on the clay. "Rahab, your lamp's out as usual." And they were gone. I sat for a moment breathing, listening to their feet fading into the darkness. And then I stood, closed the door, and put down the bar. I went upstairs, I checked on my guests, settled them back down. And then when all was quiet, I made my way all the way up onto the roof. And I went and parted the black stalks. And there they were, very hot, very sweaty, stinking of vegetation. And they sat up. "You have saved our life, woman. Why?" I said, "I know I've saved your life. Best you remember, and you saved mine. When your people come to take this city, will you protect me and my family? Will you pledge to save my life?" The one with the nice eyes, his name, he said, was Salmon. And he said to me, "Of course we will. But why have you done this?" And I can remember saying to him, "Because we have heard of your God. We have heard how he parted the Red Sea so you could leave Egypt. We have heard how he provided for you. We have heard what you did to the 2 Amorite kings. You destroyed them. And fear flows through our hearts. I know that your God is the only true God. And I know that you will come and take this land, so I beg you, in the name of your Lord, to promise that you will spare me, and my parents, and my siblings and their family." They said they would. I took them downstairs because my roof could be overseen by some of the neighbours, and I put them in the little storeroom behind the kitchen. I gave them each a sack as a little blanket, and I left them for the night, telling them not to leave the room, not to go anywhere. They couldn't leave now because they might bump into the search parties, but I would help them escape in the morning. And I went back to my room. I don't think I slept at all that night. I kept thinking I could hear the soldiers coming. I kept imagining a knock on the door. So before first light I got up. I took the scarlet cord that I used to wrap around my curtains, and I went back down to that little storeroom. And there they lay, dark rings under their eyes, beads of sweat on their forehead. I don't think they'd slept either. I showed them if we tied the cord onto the window, they could climb down the outside of the big city wall and let themselves go. It would only be a couple of meters drop. I told them too to not go straight to the ford, but to head up into the caves where they could hide for a couple of days before the men came back. Once the search party had returned, then they could easily return to their own people. And again, I reminded them of their pledge, that because of what I had done, they would save me and my family. Salmon promised that they would. With those gorgeous eyes of his locked on mine, he said that as long as I put them all into the room, into my house, and left the scarlet cord hanging down so they would know exactly where I was, they would protect me. Anyone who left the room, they could not be responsible for. And so I promised. I lowered them and some provisions down out of the window, and I stood leaning against the sash watching them worked their way down and across the plains and into the murky darkness. I prayed they would remember. I prayed they would stay safe and find their people. And then, making sure that cord was tight, I left it hanging there from the window and I went about my day. A couple of days later, I was looking out when I saw the patrols returning from the river. I saw no body bags and no prisoners. And with intense relief, I heard that they had come back empty-handed. True's Bob, they came looking for me, didn't they? Banging on my outer door. It's like, "You still looking for those favours, are you, boys?" I'm like, "No, Rahab. Were you telling the truth?" "Of course I was. It's not my fault that you're so slow you can't catch a pair of men on foot. And you can't ride fast enough to protect your king. Don't blame me for that. They were watching you, Rahab." And off they went. And not long after that, we had some scouts coming in. The most incredible thing had happened. The Israelites had crossed the flooded river. They didn't wait for it to go down. The men who'd seen it happen had said it was the most unbelievable thing. They had amassed on their side of the river, and then their priests, garbed in white and blue with gold, had walked in to the flooded river, carrying their massive ark that they said represented the presence of Yahweh. And as the priest's feet had touched the water, it stopped running. It was gone. It dried up. No more water flowed down the riverbed, and all 40,000 had just walked across. One of the scouts had ridden his car. One of the scouts had taken his horse and ridden higher upstream, and about 26 kilometers higher up, near the town of Adam, he said you would not believe what you saw. A mudslide had crossed the entire river, blocking the water flow. But this wasn't a normal mudslide. He said the water stood up in a straight wall, as if the very breath of God was holding it there. And only when that last child had crossed did the priests move from the center of the river. And as the last priest stepped out onto the riverbank, the waters had come flooding back down in full flood all the way back down to the sea. And our city trembled. We were so afraid. The king himself walked in fear and doubled the guard. They locked the gates. Nobody went in or out anymore. And every morning I checked that my cord was still hanging from the window. And every evening I checked that it was still there too. And then, not long after, we saw the priests amassing within view of the city. You could pick them out because they had on those long white robes. This time they didn't carry the ark, they carried the Israelites' huge twisted ram horns that they would blow. The army lined up behind them, men with swords at their sides. And then they started to march. They marched around the city perimeter, blowing those horns, the most eerie sound that quakes you right through to your very soul. Nobody spoke. None of them said anything. They just walked. And from watching on the wall, we couldn't understand. What were they doing? Were they waiting for allies that we didn't know about? Were they trying to frighten us because it was working? And then when they got back to their starting position, they disappeared. They went back to their camp. Could not understand what they were doing. Some of the men laughed and said they were too scared to scale the wall now they had seen it. Most of us just felt fear. We knew that their God did things in his own way. Do you know, for the next 6 days they came back? Not a word, just those horns and around, as if laying siege, claiming the land, but not doing anything about it. And then on the 7th day, I will never forget, on the 7th day, they kept going. They went round once, twice, 3 times, until 7 times they had gone all the way around the entire city. And then they stopped, and they faced inwards, and we all watched as their priests lifted those horns and blew the loudest blast we had yet heard, and suddenly we heard the voice of Israel. For every soldier raised his voice in praise to Yahweh. And at their shouts, the wall that we had put our faith and our trust in, it crashed inwards in a loud noise. We heard rocks fall. We heard the stones fall. It was as if the very hand of God had reached down and shaken the earth, and our walls collapsed. My family and I, gathered in my small house, held on to each other. We fell to the floor as the tremors continued. We heard rocks sliding across the door. We couldn't escape if we wanted to. And then, as the dust began to settle, I looked out from the window that still stood, and we saw, with swords drawn, the Israelite army just walked across the walls of Jericho. For the outer wall had fallen in on the inner wall, which had collapsed. And they didn't climb, they just walked across. And the sound of slaughter could be heard. Our door was jammed, and I was too scared to leave. Boy, was I praying that those men remembered their promise. With screams, yells, dust in our noses, we waited. And then we heard someone moving the rocks from against our door. I pushed my elderly parents behind me and stood in front. And as the door opened, there was Salman of the nice eyes. He smiled at me and reached out his hand. He said, "Our fight's not with you, Rahab, or your kin. We're here to save you." We didn't need to have an invitation sent out to us. We grabbed what little we could carry and we left. And as we turned and looked back at the city that had been our home, my heart swelled in gratitude to Yahweh. For the entire wall of Jericho lay in rubble, except for one small piece, one scarlet thread still hanging from that window. They escorted us all the way back to the camp. We weren't allowed inside, but we were made welcome on the outside with a tent and some food and water. And there, in horror, in shock, stunned amazement, we watched the army return. They brought no captives. They brought no booty. Just themselves, blood-stained, dirty, but victorious. And then I stood with my parents and watched as the Israelites burnt our city to the ground. We could hear their leader Joshua. He said that he cursed the city and anybody who rebuilt it. As he laid the foundation, their firstborn would die. And as they erected the gates, it would cost them their youngest son. It's a very sobering moment. Of the 2,000 people who lived in Jericho, my family was the only survivor. Salman came to take us into the camp once we'd been through a purification ritual. And I pledged allegiance to Yahweh. Who wouldn't? Wouldn't you? Saying what a great and incredible God he was, how powerful and how mighty. And the Israelites were welcoming. They were kind. They made us part of their family, and that gorgeous Salman with the lovely eyes became my husband. And together we had a son called Boaz. And later, one day, Boaz would marry the beautiful Ruth the Moabite. And from their line would come a line of kings, King David, and later the Messiah Jesus. Such an awesome story. What did I learn from this? I learned that God doesn't care about your race. He doesn't care about your shame. He doesn't care about your past. God only cares about your heart attitude as you seek him. God is bigger than any circumstance. There's a flooded river stopping you from achieving what God said for you. Just know with one breath, he can blow the water out your way. I know that although men put their trust in their walls of humanism, their walls of pride, of money, of power, with one shake, God can make it crumble to the ground. I learned that God is a gracious God who doesn't care where you've come from. If you have a willing heart, it doesn't matter what you're up against. He will make his plan and his purpose come true for you. He took a Canaanite prostitute. He used her to help the Israelites conquer Canaan. And then she became part of the genealogy of Jesus. I hope you've enjoyed the story of Rahab as much as I've enjoyed putting it together. I encourage you to go to your Old Testaments and read up in Joshua chapters 2 to 6 on the story of Rahab and how God, the God of the impossible, never fails to deliver his people and to know his people by their heart. God bless.